So with that being said, my guy, let's go ahead and let's get things started with the initial offseason. So as we know, at the end of the 2023 season, we lost to the Green Bay Packers in the wild card round. And I think a lot of us, at least myself, thought that, hey, you're going to need to make some changes. Whether it's at the coaching position, you did have contracts expiring with Dak Prescott and company. You had to make a decision. Do you want to blow the whole thing up? Do you want to keep riding with it? And I felt like that was the definitive moment to make that decision. But they said, no, we're going to ride this thing out. We're going to let McCarthy coach on the last year of this contract and then go from there, right? And so what ends up happening is you go through this offseason, you lose guys like Tony Pollard, Michael Gallup retires, you lose Tyron Smith to the Jets, Tyler Biadasz is gone, and you lose several other depth pieces alongside your team. And you want to know what they did when they saw all those guys walk? They went ahead and they were like, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to bring in 3 dudes. We'll re-sign a couple guys all on 1-year contracts. And they want to act like that this was going to make something work. And we kind of talked about it on our individual channels that maybe this wasn't going to be a thing. Like that this was not going to work out. And that is you brought back Zeke, you brought in Royce Freeman, and you brought in Eric Kendricks. And what's funny, in hindsight, only one dude out of that entire list made it to the end of the season. Royce Freeman didn't make it to training camp. Zeke got cut, last week? And Eric Kendricks has been solid for you, but he's on a 1-year deal, and he's an aging vet, and you don't know if he's going to come back. But with that, I did want to hand it over to you. What were your thoughts on how the Cowboys approached the offseason this year?
I still don't understand what they were doing. Like if the plan is to say, hey, we're going to try and clean our books this year and move forward, okay, there better be action this offseason if that's what the plan was. But I'm still confused as to why they thought that what they had was good enough. Was it because the cap was as tight as they thought that it was? Because, let's be honest, right? They did have limited cap space to work with. But if you would have got these deals done earlier, they end up paying these guys big time money for regardless. You would have had money to spend in free agency. And yeah, sure, maybe you don't go out and get a guy that's going to get you over the hump, but it would have been nice to supply your team with the proper depth at certain positions that you see other teams do. Now, not every free agent you have to sign to, a 5-year, $100 million contract. There's free agents out there that can be productive for your football team that you can spend a little more money for. Now, I know the Cowboys do get a lot more out of these, cheaper free agents than maybe what they're worth. But at the end of the day, hey, it would be pretty cool if you went and instead of getting a free agent that costs you $2 or $3 million, maybe you get a guy that costs you $7 or $8 and they play like a $20 million player instead of the $3 million player that plays like a $7 million player. You know what I mean? And that's kind of the way I look at this. If they would have done what they did in the past where they just brought in a bunch of bargain bin free agents, I'd at least feel a little better about that than what they did this year. They didn't even do that this year. Kendricks was the big signing that they had. And then Zeke and Royce Freeman, it's just, you're just not going to win a lot of football games like that. Now, they did win 7 games, credit to them with the backup quarterback and the injuries that they had. But I just asked the question, were they actually trying to compete this year? And I just don't know how they can look you in the face and say yes and not have people look at them like they're crazy when they say something like that.
Right, and I felt the same way because I even said it myself where I'm like, you're not even trying. And usually, like, the Cowboys, when we have seen them in this Mike McCarthy era, they have brought in a decent amount of 1-year or 2-year guys. We've seen that before. This is one of the first years where they did absolutely nothing in free agency. And now, The one thing that does bother me is that when you look at their re-signings, they brought back Rico Dowdle on a one-year contract. Chuma Adogas came back on a one-year contract. CJ Goodwin, Jordan Lewis, and Trent Sieg. Out of that, the best one was the Jordan Lewis re-signing, and I felt like, he played his ass off this year. But when you really, and also, hats off to Rico finally getting the nod at starting running back. But when you really deconstruct the team for what it was not a good football team coming into this year. And we saw that early on, even when Dak Prescott was healthy. This wasn't like Dak Prescott wasn't playing the whole year, right? We know that. And there was such a fundamental failure from top to bottom. Like when we really, and we'll get into that in the season full recap when we talk about the games and what happened. But as for the finishing, touches on talking about this offseason, they literally said, we're just going to keep things as is and hope that maybe we got something. And it wasn't like the Cowboys were horrific. It was just that the NFL is not static, right? And the thing is that you have to make changes. We see that all the time. And the Cowboys really thought we could run this back. And people want to be like, oh, well, they didn't know what they were doing. But it's just mind-numbing, to say the least. But that's enough on the off-season stuff. We can go on that forever because they don't know what the hell they're doing, we think.